It feels like Ian Curtis and Joy Division have always been there. Their debut album Unknown Pleasures was released the day before I was born, and Curtis left this existence just a few weeks before my first birthday. Years later, in a deep pit of psychic damage, I would draw a cosmic link to these completely unrelated incidents, like they were a thread between the broken shards of my own mind and that of Curtis's as he committed that most final of acts. 40 years ago, 18th of May, that was when Ian Curtis, the lead singer and lyric writer for Salford, Macclesfield, Manchester's, delete as applicable, Joy Division, died. The story of these four men, their lead singer's death at his own hands, the music and drama, have all been told and retold 1,000 times, so please don't think of me as some distant voyeur peering into that most personal of times, or some music writer hipster changing the words around on a story as well known to certain fans as that of a nursery rhyme to a child. My story, and why this anniversary has prompted this writing, is from the skewered connections we can make with artists via our own misunderstandings and warped objectives. You see Joy Division with the soundtrack to my collapse into a mental breakdown, the sonic side dish to my cocaine, ecstasy, cannabis and alcohol addictions, and my near death, as I also decided to peer into the void of my own creation and dive headfirst in. But before we get there, we must start 5 years previously in the moment Joy Division slashed and burned their way into my life. Stoned and restless, I sat waiting for the BBC's celebration of John Peel. I believe the night of programming was to acknowledge his turning 60, and aside from the documentary, the part I was most looking forward to was the section where they were to be playing video clips of bands he had played on the radio and whose career he had helped along the way. This was surely to contain some of the finest music television I had witnessed on the BBC, and my VHS recorder was whirring around making sure I'd be able to revisit this footage time and time again. With each band I checked off a mental sort of shopping list in my mind. Know them, not heard of them, brilliant, shit, and so forth. I was loving the footage of the Pink Floyd doing Astronomy Divine, Captain Beefheart and his magic band twisting the blues with electricity, and early Bowie just looking majestic. Then something happened that sent shivers up the spine and injected me with a jolt of what I didn't even know I needed. These four pasty white men in suits and trousers, looking like they dressed like the old blokes in my grandfather's social club, stood looking pensive. Then a driving bass riff, played by someone who looked like he was 8 foot tall and would batter you just to nick your last fag, kicked in. All of a sudden, the slightly bookish looking drummer launched into a drum pattern that was a blur and seemingly impossible to play. I crept closer towards the television, with the volume going up in stages. A guitar part was getting played by this teacher-like guy who looked like he didn't really know what he was doing. And then it happened. Standing central, all limbs and hooded eyes, the lead singer gazed not at me but through me. His movements were fluid and odd, almost spectral. He looked drugged up but holy, Morrison stoned immaculate. As the song progressed, he became more violent and was acting like he was slowly succumbing to an extreme anxiety attack. You could feel the words and emotions pouring out of his skin, through the screen, and into my being. The volume went up again. By the time he had reached the point in the song where he sang, well, I could call out when the going gets tough. The things that we've learned are no longer enough. No language, just sound. That's all we need know. To synchronize love to the beat of the show. And we could dance. I was losing my shit as he seemed to be losing his. His arms were flailing everywhere and he was fighting some invisible enemies who must have been attacking him from all angles as he skittered side to side. As soon as it was over, I rewound my tape and watched it again and again and again. This was it. The singer was me and I was him. I don't know why it happened, but everything about him and the way he moved, acted, looked, screamed connection. It was attraction and fear wrapped up all in one big emotional pill that I was swallowing whole. I had to know more. At this stage of my life, I had already been through one home lock-in rehab for speed addiction and was rebuilding my life via alcohol, cannabis, and an actual job in actual Cardiff. I hadn't felt this good in ages, so when I was in work next, I ran over to Spiller's Records on my lunch break and grabbed a CD copy of my first ever Joy Division album, Still. At the time, there was a really lovely goth woman who worked in Spiller's, and when she saw I was buying a Joy Division album, she started telling me about how great they were and how a really good tribute band were playing in the city in a few months and how I should go as, quote, it's the closest you'll ever get to seeing them. I mumbled some awkward bollocks, pretending like I knew everything about the band and what she was referring to about not being able to see them, and strolled back to work, chuffing on spliff, studying the minimal CD cover, anticipating what delights were held within. It took me an hour to get home from Cardiff to the Valleys in those days, and the anticipation was eating into me. I just knew I was about to have my life changed. I got home, ran upstairs, lit the obligatory 5 Skinner, and pressed play, and was left with the most confusing sensation. Was this really the same band that had been so visceral and threatening on the TV? This was not direct or fierce, it was eerie and stark. I wasn't transfixed, I was scared. I knew nothing about Nazi connections or the literary references scattered throughout, yet I knew there was something queasy and unsettling about the whole thing. Exercise 1 crept in like smoke suddenly making shapes, a cat lurch rhythm dragging you into a place you just didn't want to go. Ice Age, whip snapped, chasing its own tail, always feeling like it was about to trip over its own feet. I sat and stared in a soap bar music-induced state of paranoia. It continued, with songs like the sheet metal slashing of Something Must Break and the gothic romance of Dead Souls, which, with atmosphere, was the only real comforting moments on the album, as they felt ancient and married to a musical form I was comfortable with. Why had this album so shook me? Over time, I would realise that whilst the music was not what I was expecting, it was the lyrics and vocal delivery of Ian Curtis that had really put me on edge, as I just knew there was someone who knew my defects and my obsessions, my addictions and my malady. Here was a young man singing a British white post-punk blues music, and like the first time I smoked heroin, I just knew that this relationship could be dangerous. I had allowed my Joy Division obsession to ferment slowly, bubbling away under the surface. I had searched out news clippings and magazine articles. I had found out why the woman in Spillers had told me the tribute band was the closest I was going to get to see them. The singer I was so drawn towards had killed himself at the age of 23, which was only 4 years older than I was at this time. And as my dangerous obsession with all things Ian Curtis grew, so did my alcoholism, which to everyone outside seemed fine and normal drinking behaviour, but to me was just one more step to an early grave. I had tried to commit suicide when I was 16, and people had just put it down to typical teenage depression, but the black hole inside me was now growing larger and larger, and I was filling it with all manner of things, from junk food to booze to sex. Secret ugly habits were slotting together, and I was presenting different faces to the different groups I was around. I had left work and gone to college, where I had met a woman and who I'd started dating, yet the relationship was extreme in its difficulty from the off. We had to meet in secret so I could take a bus, then a train to Cardiff, to the centre of the city where all roads lead waiting for you. Just to see her for half an hour before heading to the pub where I would drink enough just to get some sleep on the train home. The strain was breaking me, and I was getting uglier as my addiction started ruling my thought process and was helping me make some woefully rash decisions. Around this time I bought Unknown Pleasures, Closer, and the Heart and Soul box set, again, all from Spillers, and the fear I had originally felt was replaced by one of dangerous comfort. Curtis felt like that fake drug friend who would encourage you to get more and more out of it for their own entertainment whilst they stayed sane. He also represented my ultimate fantasy, that mythical figure of rock star as poet, a tragic early death and a lasting legacy. This was my destiny, I just knew it, only I wasn't in a band, I couldn't write lyrics or sing for shit. What would I leave behind? A few tears and a massive VHS collection. There would be no books written about me, just a small column in the Ronda Leader. I had to escape. I used my aforementioned girlfriend as my passport out of the suffocating valleys, thinking that a change of location would mean a change in my mental health. The fake promise of geographic sobriety many addicts have fallen for. I went to university with her in Lampeter. Before leaving, she had bought me a copy of the Deborah Curtis book, Touching from a Distance, and this was where shit turned really sour. I would play Closer at least once a day, zoning in on the goodbye of decades and isolation. Mother, I tried, please believe me. I'm doing the best that I can. I'm ashamed of the things I've been put through. I'm ashamed of the person I am. Anyone who has suffered extreme mental health and addiction issues will understand the moment where it seems everything is relating to you and your circumstances. Adverts, radio, news, music and film all seem to be written about you and directed at you. Touching from a Distance was my Bible, and whilst it was wonderful in its dissecting of any phony mythology that had built up around Curtis, it had only elevated him in my mind. All of his negative personality traits were my negative personality traits. His failings were my failings. I was also at the time convinced I was in love with two women, and the situation, added to a failed abortion which nearly took the life of my partner, an increased intake of E and Coke, daily drinking, and a constant need to split myself into 1,000 pieces with the different groups I'd begun to hang around with, was sending me into a breakdown. I started to lie and to manipulate people. The walls were closing in fast, and I was becoming a really horrible person, setting fires to my friendships which would take years to heal, and in some cases they never would. I kept telling myself that this was inevitable and the end was in sight, Ian was my guiding light, and our relationship had become toxic. We were willing parasites feeding each other's misery. Yes, I was using the deceased man as an excuse to act like a prick and take my own life. Eventually, it all did come tumbling down, and all I remember before the hospital was playing the Heart and Soul box set before Iggy Pop's The Idiot. If you know, you know. I'd been drinking Stella all day long and then took a handful of tablets. I woke up the next day in bed covered in a dry black substance I would learn later was charcoal. It would take me a long time to fully recover from this moment in my life, and I wouldn't get fully sober for another 14 years. But the moment I woke up in hospital was the first tiny baby step towards a relative healing with the help of my now wife Laura, who helped piece me back together bit by bit. Weirdly, my first thought was not to give up drinking or drugs, but to ditch Joy Division. I slowly separated myself from them, not listening to them at all, and giving my signed copy a touching from a distance. I had met and interviewed Deborah Curtis for my dissertation, where she had been gracious and candid. I would never be able to thank her enough for her insight and honesty. To my head of department, who was also called Simon, and who had saved my shoddy attempt at academia. Of course, I would always be a fan and tell people how great they were, but I just needed some space, and then slowly over time, things started to heal, and my relationship with Ian Curtis and Joy Division would morph into something far more healthier. I've collected and read all the books on the subject, with one of the best being John Savage's recent oral history of the band, This Syrian Light, The Sun, and Everything Else. I've watched the documentaries and the film Control, and instead of seeing life goals, I'm seeing a wonderful wordsmith, a shamanic performer, and a deeply flawed individual who is seriously unwell physically and mentally. I feel sad that he got to that point, and I'm sad for those he left behind. In regards to the music, well, I have never shaken off the Black Dog completely, and he does like to snap at my heels now and then. But instead of Joy Division pulling my legs deep into the vortex, they act as a handrail for me to pull myself along through the darker moments of the day. I still have to be careful, but now the music of Joy Division and the words of Ian Curtis help me by allowing me my moment of deep introspection and solitude before I file the records away again with a thank you, my old friend. Ian Curtis died 40 years ago on the 18th of May, and what I hope is that those who highlight the anniversary do so from a place of sadness and understanding. The date marks the moment a young man saw no way out and took that fatal decision, one that many others have taken since and will continue to do so. Ian's words are those of a flawed and highly intelligent person, so let's focus on the gifts he left behind, wrapped up in the cityscapes of his bandmates and producer Martin Hannett, and remember that behind every myth, there's a human.